I mean, it really depends on what your time frame is in terms of how long you want to hold your Bitcoin. My whole thing is that I'm going to keep 90% of my Bitcoin forever. And I'm going to try to live off that 5 or 10% as my spendable Bitcoin. But it depends how long your time frame is. If you want to retire next year, then 5 Bitcoin is probably good enough to do that. I'm not going to retire for probably ever, honestly. But as long as you can find things that you like doing to do, then why would you ever retire? So with that, though, I think that the longer the time frame you have, if you're somebody in your 20s or your 30s right now, I think that if you can get to half a Bitcoin, you're going to be laughing by the end of, by the time you get to be 60, 70 years old. I think you're going to be laughing with half a Bitcoin in terms of being able to keep the majority of it and also to spend and live off of that. So that's just kind of I don't have a calculator or nobody knows. That's the thing. You can have as many calculators as you want to, but at the end of the day, we have no idea what the price is going to be worth in 10 years from now, 20 years from now. It could absolutely exceed all of our expectations by 1,000. It could also just stay around $70,000 if it doesn't do what we think it's going to do. So I just think that using common sense, using logic, and looking at how much Bitcoin is increased in terms of adoption and in price compared to US dollars and purchasing power. If you look at any sort of adoption curve, I think we're at the very flat part of that. And if you've seen how much Bitcoin has grown in the last 10 years, I think we're still going through the vertical part of the S curve sometime in the next 10 years. So that's when that'll happen. Juan Lolito says selling Bitcoin when it's much higher and hopes to buy back cheaper. I don't know. I'm not on board with that. I don't think that you should ever. It's the same thing that follows the same logic. It's like you keep your 90% in a wallet. That's your Bitcoin forever. That's your family's Bitcoin. You're lucky enough to be here during this time in history. This is how you give back to your future generations, is you keep 90% of your Bitcoin. The rest, if you want to trade 5%, sell it when it's high and buy it back when it's low, by all means. I just know that the majority of people who sold their Bitcoin stack hoping to get a bigger one later on never did. Nobody I've talked to anyways. So MRNC says, my plan is to hold forever and withdraw small portions every year. That is the play for sure. Sorry, I can't really keep up with the Zapdodge stream here. It looks like there's just folks chatting back and forth in there, so I don't need to be part of that conversation. Oh, Jason says, I think 10 Bitcoin put you in the billionaire club. Okay, well, that makes more sense. I thought it was the millionaire club, but either way, it really depends on what your time frame is. If it's 10 years, you're probably going to need a lot of Bitcoin. If it's 50 years, you're probably pretty good with a smaller amount of Bitcoin than that. As long as you hold on to it, though, that's the hard part. And even if you talk to people who were in the space 10 years ago, the majority of them do not have their Bitcoin still. It's funny listening to guys. A lot of people I meet with, they go through the first introduction saying, I heard about Bitcoin back in 2015. Somebody told me to buy it. I didn't, and I regret it. So that they're full of regret. They're pissed off that they didn't buy it. But at the same time, the people who did buy it at the time, the majority of them sold it when it went from $25 to $250. The majority of them saw a 10x gain there, which was unheard of before Bitcoin, and they sold it. So what's worse, not having that or knowing the fact that you sold Bitcoin at $250 one day? I don't know. Majir, is it Majir says only 42 million people can ever own half a Bitcoin. Exactly. It's simple math. If we end up in a world where Bitcoin is used by them, when it goes mainstream, it's just simple math, knowing how much Bitcoin people can actually have. And unfortunately, the majority of that Bitcoin will actually be held by the ETFs or lost or somewhere else. So even the 21 million, you shrink that to 17 million for the lost Bitcoin. You take away the ETFs out of that equation, then you get down to probably by the end of it, 15 million. And then the math just gets crazier and crazier.